I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 63, but also potentially our first vodcast.
Yeah.
I don't know if vodcast is a thing anymore. I guess it's just... I think that was like a term when I was an evangelical pastor, like for the last 3 years, like people were trying to catch on.
Okay.
Especially Driscoll. He was like, you got to get a vodcast. And like, you know, Driscoll was, for all his faults, he was pretty ahead of the times, technologically speaking.
Yeah.
But I don't know if vodcast is a thing. So welcome to YouTube episode 1 if I actually upload this.
I'm very, 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 very green.
Yeah.
And this isn't a complaint, but I didn't wake up this morning thinking that I was going to be on camera.
Well, I mean, I've talked about it for the past few recordings, but yeah, I finally I got some equipment and because we've made $11 total. This is actually a business now. So that's
okay.
So this tripod it's tax deductible.
Oh,
hooray!
We did it. We made it.
We have like a few more dollars. They don't pay out until after you get 10.
Okay.
I think there's like $7.80 in there, and the next time it's I'll buy. I think I bought coffee with it before, but I'll get another thing of coffee.
Nice.
So in this episode, I had approached you, which I think you've been approaching me recently. Mm-hmm. But I had some time. I started following some new Instagram people, and have been much more active on Instagram as I sort of unFacebooked and found Instagram is, I don't know, it's a different place. And one of the subsets of things that have been being recommended to me are friends like posts by others is some more deconverted Christians, which I had really gotten away from. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of jiving with them, and one of the things that kept popping up was this, we'll get into it a little bit more, but Christian hypocrisy. Specifically, like using Romans 1 or Psalm 14:1 as a weapon and fully accepting a conversion story, but then not accepting when someone who is of faith deconverts is authentic. So a lot of and we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but just a lot of the arguments against these people who deconverted, instead of actually listening to their story, processing the argument, they're just like, well, you just like Satan better than God, or you just we touched on this a little bit before in the podcast, but it's like super grating, not grading. Right? It's not like ABC, but like it's still one of the things. I can let a lot of evangelicalism, Christianity, even fundamentalism in some ways that isn't political go, but that's one that just like gets so under my skin that and we haven't beat up on evangelicals in a while, I don't think.
It's time.
So it's been time, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm interested to pick your brain on it a little bit. I don't know that. We'll see. Like, you might say something that I go, oh, but I'm interested to hear more. But it sounds like you want to talk about coffee for a little bit before you get into the weeds.
Yeah. We have to talk about coffee.
We have to talk about coffee. So I brought the Mocha Joe's. That's the coffee shop in Brattleboro that I go to all the time, and we've had plenty of their coffee on this show. But this is the Mexico, the light roast Mexico, which is more like a medium roast.
It is.
But actually, it's pretty light. It's light medium. I
mean, you ground it a little fine for my French press, and I think we for a French press, you're supposed to let it sit for 10 minutes. And I'm like, no one's got
10 minutes.
That's so when my French press, like, you know, I think it's called a Gator.
Yeah.
Shirley got it for me when we were first dating, or not first dating, about a year in. And she's like a review person. Yeah. Like, I'm like, I don't know, let's just go get a vacuum. She's like, wait, we have to research for 17 days. We need to like go through, not 7, hyperbolic. Yeah. But like she'll go through reviews and she's like, oh, these are all paid reviews or paid promotions. Like, I don't even want to look at that product. And so she got this, and it comes with like a little, like grind your coffee and put it in here for the day before. Like it's super fancy, and it used to be fancier. The paint has come off because You're not supposed to put it in the dishwasher.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a French press that looks like that.
Yeah. But they give you instructions. And they're like, you should grind your coffee for this long on this setting. You should put it in, pour half the hot water on. When it's 210 degrees, they tell you how stir it, then add the rest, and then let it steep for it.
Do they tell you it should always be filtered water?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I think a lot of our listeners know that my primary job after being a pastor was a chef, like professionally executive chef. And one of the gurus that I followed before I was even in the professionally was Alton Brown. And he's like, look, coffee has 2 ingredients. The beans and the water.
That's right.
So, like, if one of those isn't great...
That's right. Yeah. And if there's a problem with the coffee today, it's because of the grind. Yeah. It's not because of the beans. Yeah. But
don't throw yourself under the bus.
No, it's fine. I was going to say it's a solid 8.5. This is my least favorite Mocha Joes you've brought. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go 7.5.
Okay. So my point that I was making is not throwing myself under the bus. It could be better. Okay. It might not be the fault of the bean.
Yeah, it doesn't have as much
but it isn't grainy. Like that isn't the issue. So yeah. It could be
I just think some of the other Mocha Joes, there've been like a chocolatiness, a fruitiness, like there've been some depth, and this just seems like it's good.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining. If I got this at like a random diner on the road, I'd be like, this is the best diner coffee I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I would buy it again, but if I was at Mocha Joe's, I'd be like, let's go with
better.
Yeah.
Let's go with the Cameroon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go with that one that the civet pooped out.
So we're discovering that you and I have similar taste profiles in coffee. I think this is citrusy up front. And that's not your it's not your thing.
Yeah.
But I go outside of the box every once in a while. I
mean, it's good too.
I just want to see if it's fun to see if your palate changes.
It's actually getting better as I sip it more. Maybe it was just a little hot. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's a temperature, like when coffee's too hot, it's not great.
You can't get the subtleties. You have to wait until it's like...
And when it's tepid,
right, you're
like, I want to vomit.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to...
But then when it's iced, it's good again.
There's some... No, I'm not going to use that metaphor, that analogy.
Oh.
I'm going to save it for a different podcast.
Okay.
Like not a different episode. Just
like a completely
different...
Like when you're on the Joe Rogan Experience?
Yeah, like an R-rated episode.
Are there R-rated podcasts?
I don't know. Some of ours have explicit next to them on...
It's true. Well, I mark it when we...
Yeah.
Depending on what...
Like the one we had Abraham Piper swearing a few times.
Yeah, I mean, he's dropping F-bombs. Like, if you're listening to this with your kids, maybe... If we were really professional, I'd do something like This American Life, where like, just so you know, this podcast contains swears. If you want a bleeped version, please go to our...
And say it in that voice, just so you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I had a podcast voice.
I think you have a podcast voice.
Thanks. We're never going to get to this. People who are just turning it to our YouTube channel and have no idea, like, what are these two?
We just ramble.
So I started listening to another podcast because I have some time, like, in my job. I work with a small team, and often I'm on my own. And there are duties that just are, I don't want to say mindless, but there's time. Like, I'm in a giant mansion, often by myself, either like cleaning, cooking, doing linens, paying bills online.
Is it haunted?
It's not. 100%. I mean, I don't believe in ghosts, but some of the people I work with do.
Does Shirley think it's haunted?
No. So no one's ever died in it. So number one, there's that. People have lived in it continuously since it was built in the 1840s. And none of them in the past 200 years have ever reported a ghost. And one of my closest coworker, who also works in the building with me, she's like, it just has such a good energy. And she's like that kind of person. So I feel like there's a lot of evidence to point to not haunted. But anyway, I added a new podcast called The Weirdest Thing I Learned This Week. And it's like an offshoot of, I think, Scientific American, where some of the editors were like, this isn't a full article, but this is a really cool fact. And it's hosted by a few women, and their voice is so... You know the SNL skit where the guy from 30 Rock?
Yep.
And
yeah.
they're like...
sweaty...
Yeah.
Sweaty...
It's like, that's their voice.
The NPR voice.
Yeah, the NPR voice. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's the... what's her name? She's like...
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the NPR voice. So that's their voice. Does that voice grate you? Or is it like ASMR almost? Like, you fall asleep?
It's like a little bit in the middle.
Yeah.
Because, like, I do get to... Like, their facts are really cool, and the podcast is great. But I do get a little distracted thinking, like...
Yeah.
I saw this skit.
Yeah. And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast.
Yes.
A Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, life, religion, and coffee.
That was such a great podcast voice. I'm so unbelievably proud of you, man.
Thanks, Nate.
We never get into the topic.
Today, we're going to talk about bad evangelicals. As if there are good ones.
So one of the things I said to you, though, was, before we hit record, because you were like, oh, it's just going to be an episode where we bash on evangelicals, is I would go so far as, and we can get there, I don't think I can jump to it, that this is also a liberal religious problem as well.
Yeah.
Because I think none of... Hyperbolically... Is YouTube silence as bad as radio silence? I don't know.
We'll see.
I think none of them accept what the atheists or deconverts or agnostics... I think they'll accept more what agnostics... they don't accept their testimony as true. So even the liberal Christian, especially when I was deconverting, there were a lot of Christians who weren't part of the Southern Baptist Acts 29 network who were like, oh, you deconverted because you were part of that. If you only were a little more liberal, if you only read, the Old Testament, not as history but as metaphor, you wouldn't have lost your faith. And I feel like that's very dismissive.
Yeah. Do you think that those who've deconverted by and large, or people who just were atheists, do you think that they reciprocate? This is the devil's advocate. Do you think that they accept conversion stories as true, or do you think they're dismissive of those?
So I think there's clearly some, like Dawkins, who would say you've deluded yourself. I think I was probably there for the first 6 months after deconversion. I think most people go through like the angry atheist phase. And I did have to grapple with some of that because in our church we had demonic experiences and I did exorcisms and a lot of the people in my congregation were like, well, how do you do that? And people in Acts 29 were like, you had all this fruit of the Spirit. Like, how do you balance that? And I think there are pretty rational, naturalistic explanations where I think we've talked about before.
Yep.
So I think there are those atheists who are fully dismissive. I think I've come to a point to say, sure, you had that experience and that experience was real for you. Mm-hmm. And I can see that you used to live in this way and that could be, the stereotypical prostitute who's washing Jesus' feet and like just totally messed up axe murderer, and then you found religion and now you go to church and you wear a suit and you don't abuse your family and you don't cheat on your taxes and you're a better person. Like, yes, that happened to you. And I as an empiricist and a naturalist, it's hard for me to say no, that didn't happen to you. Like, there's evidence right there.
Yeah, I don't. That's a pretty wild story. I think it's telling that maybe I've never actually seen that kind of conversion.
What?
I'm in the weird position of being a Christian who's skeptical of nearly every conversion that I see.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in seminary, there was a guy who was pretty high up in the mob who became an evangelical, and he would tell the story. And some of my professors loved him, and some of them really didn't, because they were like, he's focused so much on his old life and not the future glory of Christ. But he would be like, yeah, I like straight up murdered people and shot them in the back of the head and had no remorse, and now I feel really bad about it, and I try to repent, and completely changed his life around.
Right.
And I think,
I think maybe that's partly the thing that makes me skeptical, though. It's like a lot of conversion stories that I see are not conversions of worldview, but people who are at the end of their rope. And, it's kind of a trope, but it's true. Like, if you want to plant a church in a town, especially one that's... Well, it doesn't matter. If you want to plant a church in a town, if you can gather disaffected young evangelicals, and addicts, you have a church.
Yeah.
And then the addicts supply you with the numbers of people that you baptize. Who, it might be their third time they've done that.
Yeah.
Some new church rolled in, or some church that's been there for a while rolled in, and you baptize them, and now you can send it to your mission board or whatever. We baptized 4 this month, and you think, is that conversion, or is that... Because when I think of conversion, what would be truly impressive would be something that like I couldn't explain in any natural way. Like the most skeptical, empirical, rational, college professor from Amherst or UMass or Yale or Harvard has this experience where he's like, now I'm an evangelical Christian.
Yeah, I think though there are those. My story is sort of like that because I was physics, math major. My mom, I don't want to say was a lapsed Catholic because she completely cast it all off. Right? Like we weren't even like Easter and Christmas. She was like, this is all BS.
Yeah.
So I was raised essentially as an atheist, and she was liberal enough where she's like, when you grow up, believe what you want to believe. And she was like, you should read the Quran and the Bible, and I didn't until college, and I actually took a comparative religion course and was exposed to the Bhagavad Gita and Taoism and anyway. So I went from that to there is a God, and that God is Jesus, and then back to where I am now.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not a conversion story. I mean, although it was, right? And it was celebrated for at least a decade, as a conversion story. And some of these... So one of the Instagrams I sent you was Eve Was Framed, which has got me thinking about this. And she talks a lot about how she was a worship leader. Her father was a pastor. She was baptized, did missions trips, was the good PK. Right, because there are two types of PKs, right? There's the one that go left, and then the one that follow the line, right?
I think more follow the line, but the other ones.
But there's no middle ground. There's no lukewarm pastor's kids. It's
that's probably true.
It's like all in or not at all.
I'm gonna fire up the Survey Monkey. Got something to talk about with people.
Anyway, but she did all the things, right?
Yeah.
And was in seminary like me when she lost her faith. And I believe, from what I've seen on her Instagram. And I don't know where I was going with that, but the vitriol of Christians who tell her, she didn't change her worldview. She still believes in God. She's just suppressed the truth, right? Romans 1 style. And has just decided to worship Satan because she wants to be, a terrible sinner, which is what I got. And I think there are people who still do, they're like, you're just suppressing the truth. You really do believe in God. I know where I was going. So one of her Instagram posts was she was responding to someone else's Instagram post who was responding to her, and he said, I was a God-loathing atheist, right? Mm-hmm. And she said, how can you be a God-loathing atheist?
Good question.
Right? I'm not a unicorn-loathing anti-unicornist.
Right.
Right? So this person, their radical conversion story was I hated God, and I was an atheist. And now I love God and I'm a Christian. And it's those two things don't go to, they don't mix.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
And so she's this guy saying, you went from a God-loving Christian to a God-hating atheist. And she's like, no, because by definition,
Right.
I don't believe in God. I can't hate something that I don't actually think exists.
Uh-huh. Well, that's ironic because you hear that argument launched against atheists all the time by Christians.
Right.
It's used the other way, where it's like, why do you hate a God that you don't believe in?
Right.
And every time I hear that, I'm like, you're the one who's supplying the hatred for God.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't hate God. I don't believe in him, but I do really despise some of God's followers' actions and teachings.
Yeah,
And that doesn't go for evangelical Christians either. Like, there's a lot in Islam. There's a lot in, like radical Judaism. There's a lot in radical Hinduism. Like whenever you get more right of center, like, it is a breeding ground for extreme abuse, I think.
Sure.
For all religion. So,
Sure.
like, I don't hate Krishna. I don't hate Allah. I don't hate Yahweh. Like, I don't believe in any of them. But some of their followers, I'm like, instead of stoning the adulterers, could we get you in the center? Also, I don't condone stoning people, and I actually don't even think I could.
But you do condone getting stoned. I'm a dad.
I mean, liberal Massachusetts. So.
Yeah. So I'm kind of fixated and fascinated by this idea of not accepting people's deconversion stories.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it seems like a person's story is just their story. And maybe that's my wiring and my makeup. It's like, what? I mean, I get annoyed at these. There's plenty of podcasts out there. Plenty. The first one that comes to mind is by someone named Alyssa Childers. I think that's how you pronounce her name. She was in some Christian band in the early 2000s, some Christian rock band. And
He was a Skillet.
No, but he's another one that's like this, where he's online. I don't know if he probably does have a podcast, but where they talk about like the problems with deconstructing Christians, and I'm thinking the whole idea of deconstructing Christians doesn't even need to be a part of your podcast, because what you're really saying is, I disagree with their worldview.
Yeah.
It isn't even about them. Or it shouldn't be about them. But more often than not, they don't actually go into the actual worldview of the people that they're protesting against, the quote-unquote deconstructs. But these people who don't have psychology degrees begin to psychoanalyze why someone would, they treat deconstruction as if it's this dishonest movement, when really, I think, for me, it's a movement that's about intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
It's not about... So...
Well, I think...
In other words, what's really happening, maybe now I'm guilty of psychoanalyzing, but it rings true to me anyway, and I think probably a lot of people in the audience, what's really happening is that the people railing against deconstruction or deconversion need to protect their theology.
Yeah, I was
it's
just gonna
not
say,
about...
It's an apologetic podcast.
Right.
And it's not even to protect themselves. I think there is some there. I think they also think like, oh, we have to stop these other people. But depending on...
Yeah.
And so that's why I say like there's this hypocrisy, right? So if I went back to church tomorrow, right? Even the church that I came from, knowing my history, and I was like, I had a dream last night. Jesus told me he was God. I walked away. I was blind. Now I see. That would be celebrated. And there have been, in recent history, Christians who deconverted and then reconverted.
Right.
And people have posted, oh, they're back. Oh, celebrate. Oh, praise Jesus. Right? No one would question that. I would be accepted as having changed my worldview. But having deconverted, I'm like, here are the reasons. Here are the arguments. Here's where, when I was in seminary and I was learning some things, this didn't quite jive, this didn't... They're like, oh, no, that's not what happened. That's, like...
Right.
And I'm like, no, it is. Like, here's what happened. And they're like, that's not what happened.
But again, I can see the same thing going in the opposite direction. You have somebody who was not a Christian becoming a Christian, and their former atheists or secularists or non-Christian friends are saying, well, there's natural explanations for why this is. It isn't the reasons that you think it is.
Right. I guess the difference is I wouldn't tell them that they're not a Christian. If they completely change their worldview from there is no God, everything is naturalistic, there's an explanation, even if we don't know it yet.
Uh-huh.
Right? And they're like, that's where I was. I published articles about it.
Uh-huh.
I read books about it. I espoused it on my Facebook and my Insta and my Twitter/X. And all I wanted to do was convert people to atheism. And I had some sort of religious experience, or there was an argument I hadn't considered before, and I started believing in God and digging in deeper. I thought that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and the way to the Father. And I'm now going to church. I'm trying to convert people. I got baptized. I might say there's reasons that you think you had there are reasons behind your religious conversion that I don't believe are supernatural. But I would say you had a religious conversion, and now it's very clear that you're a Christian. I wouldn't say, no, you're not a Christian. You're actually an atheist.
I see. But that makes sense to me, but it also appears to me as more of like a moral, ethical position, like a conviction that you have about how people ought to be treated, than it does based in logic or rationality.
What do you mean?
In other words, like, if I have belief A and you have belief B, it doesn't matter if you used to be A and now you're B. I've always disagreed with B. Mm-hmm. I've always felt that B was untrue.
Yeah.
So it's not logically inconsistent for me to say, look, this is why you're not really B. You just think you're B, but in all actuality, B doesn't exist. But I could also say that, and at the same time, I respect that your conscience has led you to a point where you're accepting B, and as an A, I'm willing to listen to why B may be correct, but I'm also going to state that is not my worldview. That feels different than saying, and I think what is grating you and should grate you is this idea of well, okay, let me back up a thing. I think the difference between the conversation of an atheist. Sorry,
you got yourself in the weeds.
Yeah, I got myself in the weeds. The stakes are different. If you deconvert, you know your former friends know you're going to hell. If you become a Christian, you know that your former non-Christian friends think maybe you went off the deep end. And those are different stakes, right? It's like one is religious trauma, fear of hell, versus maybe some social ostracization. But I don't think it even leads to that. No, your friends will still talk to you.
Oh, I think conversion absolutely leads to social ostracization.
Yeah. It doesn't.
If it's if we're talking about the South where someone hated God, and like that's not going to. But like in the churches I was a part of, when someone did convert, they either quickly had some friends come to church or they lost those friends. And partially is because the ethos, especially in a college town, of what it means to be a Christian and what it means to just be a regular college student are incompatible.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to the fraternities on Friday night. You're not smoking pot. You're not having premarital sex if you're a good Christian. Uh-huh. Right? And you did have this radical conversion. So there's all these things that you used to do with your friends.
Right.
That you no longer are doing. And so I don't think it's the atheist agnostic friend saying we don't want to hang out with that person anymore, although that has happened and I've seen it because sometimes that new Christian is obnoxious.
Uh-huh.
Right? And Christians would say no, they have a zeal for the Lord and God is just hardened their friends' hearts. Right? But a zeal for the Lord can just sound like you're obnoxious. But I think more often what happens is they're just not doing the same thing. Now, they're accepted by a new group, so there's not a ton of social loss necessarily. But I don't think that I think they become water and oil.
Yeah.
They don't mix.
It seems like the issue here is, and that's, I accept all that. you win. But I think that the issue here is how it feels to have people not accept your experience, and also to realize that their friendship with you was conditional.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's more... It's not only the not accepting the experience, it's instead of listening... It's instead of listening. Like,
yeah.
You can disagree with the experience. You can say, I think that was wrong. But at the end of the day, when you're... Like with this Instagrammer and what I experienced 10 years ago when I deconverted, 8 years ago, it's been a while, was instead of listening to the argument, there was a knee-jerk, well, yeah. You're just deceived. And it wasn't, especially when when the Christian deconverts, it's not that they're deceived, it's that they're willfully walking away from it. The non-Christian can be deceived because they don't know anything. But once you know, right, once you've tasted the aroma of Christ, and right, it's that Hebrews 4, Hebrews whatever, 11, Romans 1, like, it's not even a deception anymore, it's a willful disobedience. And for that to be true, right, now I would say if every single Christian who lost their faith, deconverted, moved into a more open, liberal stream of Christianity, started doing cocaine and murdering people, punching people in the face, and like was just running around naked, throwing poop like a bonobo, I'd be like, all right, that seems like it's pretty willful disobedience, right? But when they're saying, I actually feel like a better person, I actually have less fear, I'm actually less judgmental, I actually have more peace, like, it doesn't sound to me like willful disobedience, especially when most of our stories come with an extreme period of grieving and remorse.
Right.
I don't, I'm part of some secret Facebook groups still. I hardly engage with them anymore. But when I did, almost everybody's story was like, I just found this place. I'm so sad. I really wish that I didn't read this book. Or I really wish I didn't listen to this argument. I really wish that I didn't lose my faith because I loved God so much. Right? Yeah. And for then the Christian to come in, especially the anonymous Christian on the internet, and say, and actually maybe even more the people you know, to say you're just willfully disobedient and want to be in sin. I'm like, you didn't listen to a thing that person said, right? And so these Instagram people, they're putting up arguments, they're putting up blogs, vlogs, and instead the comment section, which I know comment sections are dumpster fires.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of people in the comment section intelligently interacting with the argument, right? Especially the women deconverts. They get a lot of evangelical men, and you can click on their profile after the comment and see that they're like, God first, I love Jesus, America, right? Yep. Like, some of these people are pastors, and they're like, you just want to be a whore. And I'm like, you're writing that to somebody on the internet? Like, are you gonna, like, what about if your daughter deconverts? Like, are you gonna call her a whore? Like, and that is like the PGest term I can use on this podcast for what these Christians, air quotes for the podcast, are saying to these people. I don't know where I was going, but so what gets me, even when I was deconverting, instead of entertaining the argument, and by entertaining, I don't even mean that you have to decide that it's going to be true at the end. Just listening to it and thinking through it yourself, and saying, yeah, I weighed the evidence that you presented, I still fall on Christianity's true or Islam's true, right? There's just you just want to blow cocaine off strippers' bums. And I'm like, I don't. None of that sounds appealing to me. Like, I did cocaine in college once. It was a terrible experience. Like, I talked nonsense in the bathroom for 17 hours.
Yeah. This is what it's like to leave a community of people that are brainwashed. Is that harsh?
I mean, no. They're going to say the same about me.
But what community are you a part of that you're meeting weekly or twice a week to talk about the same book?
Right. Yeah, and
to hear the same cliches over and over again.
And I would go even further to have people tell you, like happened to me in seminary, don't read this book.
Right.
Don't do this. Don't think about this.
Right.
And the second you start telling people not to do something that is not immoral or unethical, that's a very, very scary place philosophically for me.
Uh-huh. It's censorship. I mean, in a way. It's not technically censorship.
I mean, you could go extreme like North Korea where like, don't...
But it's trying to... oh man, there was a post the other day I'm not going to remember. Like, if what you're claiming to be true is true, then you don't need to protect it from untruth.
Perfect love casts out fear, right?
If
you're afraid of a book,
you could just say it, and that's it. There's no... It doesn't need to be defended. So this whole premise within, fundamental evangelical Christianity that we need to defend the truth is really just we need to protect our worldview. And at the end of the day, I think we just need to protect our psyches. We need this to be true.
Yeah.
So that if that's true, if what I just said is true, then deconversion is really brave. And really courageous because you know what you're doing before you do it.
Yeah.
I think everybody who deconverts knows what they're doing before they do it. What they're doing is losing friends.
Sometimes family.
Sometimes family.
Depending on the religion, sometimes beheading.
Right.
Like deconvert from Islam in Saudi Arabia and see how that goes.
Right, but just sticking with like American Christianity, it's still a lot to lose. It's still very painful. And that casts a pall over Christianity because if you need it, if you need fear in order to keep people in, it's not legit. It's not valid. So if that's Christianity, then it's not valid. But I still identify as a Christian.
I mean, I think some branches of evangelicalism, we know, would say that fear is valid, in the same way that they would say you should spank your kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's righteous discipline. And what's funny is, looking back, the churches that taught that you should spank your kids were the churches that had the most fear-based sermons. Sure. And, like this morning I had a not stellar moment with my 4-year-old who was not getting dressed. He started kicking me, and I was very patient before. Like, we all had to get to school. We were doing this. Shirley had to get to work. And we have a morning routine, and we went through the morning routine, and he was happy, and I was like, all right, bud, time to put on your shirt. And he fought me, and I was like, okay, well, let's do pants instead. And he started kicking, and I screamed. Mm-hmm. And he instantly burst into tears. When I was an evangelical, I would yell a lot more at my kids. Like, I have a very loud roar. I hardly ever do it. And he was like, whew, right? Mm-hmm. There was a fear when I yelled. Yeah. If I had to discipline, I could discipline him always like that. And it's not, it's going to end up being pretty traumatic. Uh-huh. I could. Instead, I try to parent. I do the gentle parenting thing so hard. Uh-huh. But it's a love-based.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like it's ironic that the fear-based religions are also, I guess it isn't ironic, are also the religions that teach that you should discipline harshly with spanking or, if we can jump to liberal Christianity real quick, because I don't want to just beat up.
Smooth transition.
I know, we could. On them, when I deconverted and when some of these people get online is, evangelicalism is the devil. Mm-hmm. American Christianity isn't Christianity. Mm. We have to look at the whole, the whole history of 2,000 years. Like, apologists haven't looked at the 2,000 years of history and ended up in American Christianity, right? Mm-hmm. And what they say to these people is like, oh, of course you don't believe. You had the wrong stream. And you do know there's a God. And we're not saying you're deceived, and we're not saying that you're sinful. We're just saying, like, when it really comes down to it, you'll come to this nice, gentle Jesus eventually, right? So go do your deconversion thing. That's cute, right? That's like, it's a step you have to take, but listen to our theology, and we're just going to read the Old Testament, every part of the Bible we don't like, as either the part of the Bible that was written by men or allegory. And we're just going to cherry pick those verses that we really like. And we're going to say, that's so come to that. And I'm just like, that's just as patronizing. It's just as disingenuous. And it's just as protecting, because they're saying, okay, if this person left this more radical version of Christianity that believes in a way more than my liberal version, then I need to protect that too. And the only way I can protect it is saying, that version's wrong, my version's right, my version's gentler. You'll come back to mine eventually.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You went from Christianity to atheism the way that somebody jumps out of an airplane without a parachute.
I did. I had a...
You just happened to
a
have...
Saul of Tarsus experience.
Right.
But, and I say that.
So maybe liberal Christianity is like a parachute.
Potentially.
Eventually you're going to land on the ground.
So when 3 years before I deconverted, there was a pastor who was an evangelical pastor, went to a more liberal seminary. Not like Harvard liberal, but, not Southern Baptist theological.
Like Fuller or something?
Wheaton. I don't have their permission to talk about it, and they kind of... So,
gotcha.
And they were still pastoring. They were just doing, gentle parent pastoring, essentially. And I was like, so you don't believe any of this anymore.
Yeah.
Why do it? And they said, why throw the baby out with the bathwater? And I said, well, if the baby is a rotting corpse and the bathwater is, toxic sludge, I think we should get rid of both of them.
Yeah.
But, and maybe that is a parachute. Maybe that's what they needed. Maybe psychologically they can't stare into the void and laugh.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think, like, I've learned to do. Right? But, and now they wouldn't tell atheists that their story was disingenuous, because there's a Christian atheist, which I know we're going to have one on potentially at some point. So I guess I did jump. It's always like when you give your testimony, right? Whether it's your conversion testimony or your deconversion testimony, in seminary they call it the elevator speech, right? You get on floor 1, you're going to floor 20, you got to get this through, right? Which is why there are pamphlets with the Roman road, like memorize these 7 verses, just like give me your pitch.
Yeah.
And of course, both things are so much more nuanced and complicated, right?
Yeah.
So I had, had doubts here and there, even as a pastor, but they were fleeting. They were like, how does this verse jive with my physics degree? And then I would read a book like, Josh McDowell and Tim Keller were absolutely instrumental in answering some of these doubts that I had, especially about science. And then it was like a 6-month route in seminary that started when I got an A- on a paper, and the professor's notes were, this was an A, however, the earth was created at 6,000 years ago, and so I can't give you full credit because you're wrong.
Yeah.
My seminary, the statement of faith did not say you had to be a young earth creationist, right? And I was like, that's BS. And then they started, my next class, they were like, oh, you shouldn't read any of the 4 apocalypse books, this, that. And so I hadn't even actually read them yet, but I started thinking, like, why shouldn't we? Just like we were talking about, love wins, right? Perfect love drives out fear. If, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then, like, that capital T truth is gonna...
It doesn't need us.
Right. and these other arguments, they're gonna fall. They're gonna fail.
Yep.
There's gonna be an answer in Scripture, an answer in apologists, to combat them and say, oh, yeah, Dawkins is an idiot. Hitchens is blinded, right?
But they'd never see it anyway. With that... They'd never see it anyway without some kind of miracle.
Yeah. So, but, I mean, that's... it was a long, winding road, and then I think we've talked at the end. It ended with the Bill Nye,
Right.
who's the Creationist Institute guy, not Ray Comfort. The other one,
Ken Ham.
That debate. And
debate.
at the very end of the debate, I had deconverted like somewhere in the middle of that debate, and I was like, "Oh my Lord, everything I believe is wrong."
Yeah.
At the end of that debate, the moderator turns to each of them and he says, "What would get you to change your mind?" And Bill Nye said, "Evidence." And Ken Ham said, "Nothing." He didn't say, like, he wasn't silent. His answer was, "Nothing would get me to change my mind." And I was just like, that is a really awful, terrible place to be.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then I sort of went back and was like, maybe I could be like C.S. Lewis, maybe I could be like Chesterton, maybe I could be like Tolkien, but not Catholic. And then I went back to atheist. So there was like this wavering after my radical deconversion for a few months to the point where I was like, I just have to accept this. Like, I tried to go back to C.S. Lewis. I tried to go back into... And I was like, they're wrong.
Yeah. Man.
All right, I feel like I've like railroaded this episode.
You haven't railroaded it. It's really good stuff. I think it'll be compelling to people to hear you talk so frankly and passionately about your own experience. I think that I think liberal Christianity is something that I could get on a hobby horse about.
We have another episode coming up.
We have another episode. Because I don't think they intend to be patronizing. I think that what the point I was getting at when I was saying you kind of jumped out of the plane and they're kind of going on a parachute is a lot of times what people from, and I feel like I belong in this category even though I always try to say I'm more nuanced than everyone.
Everyone's more nuanced than everyone else.
I know that like my fundamentalist friends, who are probably more like my former friends, view me as an ex-evangelical or a deconstruct or a liberal Christian, something of that sort. And you get something similar in attitude from them as you might as well have deconverted in some ways. In other words, what you get from them is, well, you're just on the path. Like, first you're going to say that gay people aren't sinning. And then you're going to say that not everything in the Bible is true. And then you're going to say the earth is not 6,000 years old. And then you're going to say, and eventually you're just going to be an atheist. That's the path that you're going down. And there's a pattern there that they're noticing it's not completely invalid.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you can have sympathy for the person who's like, I'm jumping out of the plane, but not without a parachute. Not without knowing a landing spot. Maybe that's not the best metaphor. Maybe it's more like I'm gonna...
They're driving the speed limit.
Yeah, I'm gonna wear...
Instead of wearing...
I'm gonna wear a life jacket, and hopefully I'm gonna wear a life jacket in this pool until I die. And you're like, just take the life jacket off. You know, they know,
right.
We all know eventually you're gonna take it off. So why even... just get on the bike. Don't even put the training wheels on. Just get on the bike, fall, get up, and then you know how to ride a bicycle. But I think at the same time you can say that, and for the fundamentalist Christians who are looking at that experience, they're looking at it with a scoffing attitude. Whereas I think you look at it sympathetically. You could say, I understand, as a person who used to be an evangelical, why you wouldn't want to immediately just rip the Band-Aid off and go straight to the deep end.
I logically, as a person,
yeah,
I've gotten more nuanced in my life, but I'm just like, no, just...
Yeah, but
rip it off, man.
But I think as a person, you also don't have vitriol against the person whose journey is that.
Yeah.
Whereas the evangelical, I think, has the same amount of vitriol for the deconverting ex-evangelical as they do for the deconvert-ed atheist.
Well, they're the same.
Right.
Even liberal Christians, right? So when I was in seminary at Southern Baptist Theological, think we talked about this before. One of my seminary professors said his goal in life is to convert Catholics, not non-Christian. He lived in Louisville, Kentucky. Apparently there's a larger Catholic population there. Coming from New England, I thought all Catholics lived here, but...
and this guy who's trying to convert Catholics was a liberal Christian?
No. He was a Southern Baptist
gotcha.
Professor of evangelism and something else, which is... he's like, I need to convert Catholics because they're going to... So, like, he's like, the largest Christian denomination in the world. He's like, they're not Christians. I have to convert them or they're going to go to hell. Right? So, in his worldview, and most of, I'd say probably the professors at Southern Seminary or Dallas Theological or, Southwestern, the big evangelical seminaries, they would say there are very few streams of Christianity that are true and the rest are... Right? There is no difference between the PC USA pastor, the, Episcopalian, the Anglican. There's no difference between them and me.
They're all just... Okay, yeah.
We're all blinded. We're all deceived. None of us are going to heaven because we don't believe in the right Jesus.
Yeah, the more radical you are, the more people there are that are wrong.
Yeah.
That's the way that works.
Although, I would say liberal Christians are going to look at them and say they're wrong. They just don't think they're going to hell for being wrong.
Yeah, my experience of liberal Christians is that I don't know on what grounds they say they're Christians.
Sometimes, yeah.
And maybe that's the next episode. Unless you want to
keep ranting.
Keep.
No, if you're listening and you're a Christian, what I hope they would take away from this is, before jumping to some Bible verses that your pastor or seminary or Bible study leader had you memorize about why someone is the way they are, right? So instead of jumping down my throat and saying, well, Proverbs 14:1 says, the fool in his heart says there is no God, so you're a fool, so I need to listen to your arguments, or Romans 1, that have hardened my hearts, and, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above. Like, just listen to the argument, listen to the story, and try to take away some of the baggage that you've been indoctrinated with. And you can go back to it. You can say, I listened to that story, and at the end of the day, I still think this, but listen first. And if they give an argument, engage with the argument. Because the worst that can happen is that you find a little compassion and maybe potentially strengthen your faith by listening to an argument and saying, no, I weighed that. Right? Come, let us reason together. Thus saith the Lord. And and if you're a liberal Christian, take off. So my analogy actually would be evangelicals think they need a boat. Right? Liberals think they need a life jacket. And I'm like, guys, the water's 6 inches deep. Just stand up.
That's perfect. Yeah. But I think the people you're talking about, I don't know. It's a beautiful naivete to imagine a scenario in which somebody can go on Instagram and in front of the watching evangelical world say, I've deconverted. And then expect them to go, oh, please, like Willy Wonka, please tell me more about that. That would be a beautiful thing if that could happen. But if they're all thinking like Ken Ham, what's the point?
Yeah. If
nothing can change their mind, which I think is really where they're at.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing can.
And I don't think
the only thing they have to do is try to convert you.
Right. I don't think these bloggers, Instagrammers, influencers, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I want to change people's mind. On some level, I think they want to change people's mind. But I think we know that the hardcore evangelical, without some spiritual experience, is not going to listen to an atheist argument and be like, oh yeah, you're right. I think why we do it is for the people in the middle. The people watching. Like when I deconverted, every Sunday for like 6 months, I would post the most ridiculous Bible verses I could find. Right? Just the ones like about donkey penises and like smashing babies' heads against rocks and bears eating babies, little kids, because they called the guy baldy. Like, and some of my evangelical friends were like, or my atheist friends were like, why are you doing this? Like my humanist friends. They said, you're not converting anyone. In fact, you have 600 common threads, and the evangelicals and the Christians are just like not listening to a word you said. And I said, I'm not doing it for them.
Yeah.
I said, I'm having messages from ex-congregants who were like, hey.
Yeah. That's right.
That helped. Right?
That's right. I've gotten the same things in some of my... I mean, I don't get in, like, super Facebook long threads like I used to.
It's not 10 years ago. Right?
It's not 10 years ago, but same reason. And anybody who does that, I think, is doing it for that reason.
Yeah.
It's for the lurkers.
And
people really read your stuff and they don't like, because they don't want to see their friends liking the thing that you're saying, and they don't like the comments, but they'll private message you. And everybody who's had any kind of long Facebook thread that was about something serious, I think, has had this experience where you'll get several private messages about a post and say, hey, I didn't like it, I didn't comment, but I read it, thank you, I needed that. That's what you do it for.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And not only that, but for the people who are struggling silently.
Uh-huh.
Right? Like that person in a small rural town in Texas who, for whatever reason, lost their faith, but they can't tell anyone. Because they're going to lose their family, they're going to lose their friends, they're going to lose their job, they're going to... Like that person, you're like, hey, secretly follow my Instagram, we got you.
So if I lose my faith, and because of it, I lose my friends and my family and my job and my entire...
I got a room in the basement, man.
And all of that stuff. No, I'm saying hypothetically but yeah. Rachel and my kids wouldn't reject me. I think I'd be okay. But I just mean like the universal I. Like if I lose my faith, and because I lost my faith, I also lose all the other things. Does that sound like freedom? or does that sound like coercion, control,
right,
power?
I took it the other way for a second. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like freedom. Losing all, like, if you can lose all that stuff and...
No, they have...
yes.
They're basically threatening, short of saying we're going to behead you.
Yeah.
They're threatening everything else.
Yeah.
Your paycheck. If you're a pastor,
and
if you're in professional ministry...
And you've seen it, right? You've seen other people get punished.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it, and
so, I'm not saying you... that's the universal. The royal you.
Yeah. That culture, it just... I think by definition can't be of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for now.
Well, hope it wasn't as painful as you thought when I first.
No, it was great. I'm grateful that that people got to hear you be a little. I think that's probably as vulnerable as you've been.
Maybe.
And I'm grateful that people got to hear that and see that. So.
All right. Any parting words?
Maybe I'm going to try on this podcast voice.
Jump out the boat. All right.
It's a good sermon.
Right? Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, if you are. And we love you guys. We're here.
Sorry about my forehead.
Have a great week.